So one night I Googled 3 words that would forever change my life. And I Googled rage before period. Suddenly I read 3 words that would forever define my understanding of me: premenstrual dysphoric disorder, known as PMDD. There I was at 42, linking all of my feelings to my menstrual cycle. I had no idea that anything could be attached to my menstrual cycle as far as what I was feeling. But there I was, understanding and reading that there were 1 in 12 women in the United States and 1 in 20 in the world, women just like me, suffering. So I want to talk to you a little bit about premenstrual dysphoric disorder, what it is, what it looks like, and how we can really treat the root cause. So back in high school, I was in high school in the 90s, and at that time, mental health was just being talked about. Menstrual cycle awareness or menstrual health was not even something that was a part of anyone's conversation. And during this time, I know that in high school, I was experiencing depression. I know that I had these lows, but I didn't always feel these lows. I knew that I was sad and I was moody, but I wasn't always feeling that way all the time. I knew that sometimes I would be irritable and angry, but I wasn't angry and irritable all the time. I knew that I could cry easily and I was sensitive to rejection, but not all the time. For over 20 years, I experienced this debilitating cycle that left me tired and alone and ashamed to talk about what I was feeling because some of the lows were so bad. It really almost nearly destroyed my life. So in COVID, I lost my job and I discovered that I was a non-essential worker. And I had 2 teenage daughters in my home in New York City, and their school closed, including remote learning. It was during this time that my emotions were skyrocketing or completely plummeting, and I felt like I had no control. I was in a relationship at the time, and he would beg me to please go get help. Please talk to your doctors, like get on meds. And, I was at such a rock bottom feeling as a mother, a single mom, that I was willing to do anything for the sake of my children to figure out what I had, what was coming up. Was it just this COVID, quarantining? So I began speaking with my GP, my endocrinologist, my OBGYN, my therapist, and friends. And over the next 18 months, I felt like everything. I had tried antidepressants and SSRIs and anti-anxiety medication. I had tried supplements and taking out alcohol and removing gluten. I was exercising more. I was praying, and I even tried ketamine therapy. But nothing seemed to be really touching the deep, deep pain. Nothing was really bringing me the relief that I really needed. And so month after month, I would promise my daughters and I would promise my boyfriend, I'm going to get better. I'm going to figure this out. I'm not going to be so angry. I'm so sorry. And just trying to get control of what I felt like I could. Like I could fight this battle and win this battle. Well, month after month, another moment of rage and just an unrecognizable version of me would come out of my skin, my body, my emotions, and it would destroy my home. I was sensitive to rejection. If the slightest thing would set me off coming home from work, and I would ask my daughters if the dishes were done and or why weren't the dishes were done, and it would go on and on. I felt dismissed. I felt very easily angered and provoked. And after I would explode, I would find myself in a puddle of tears, full of shame and guilt because I yelled over something that I knew was really so minor, but I couldn't really get a hold of it. I didn't know how to control the deep waves of sadness, the anxiety and the fears, the panic attacks, the sensitivity to rejection, this irritability, the rage. And it's something that we just don't talk about as women. Meanwhile, there's 75% of women who experience PMS symptoms. So the night that it got really bad for me, the worst, was the night that my boyfriend, at the time, he left. It just got too bad. And he said, I love you, but I can't do this. I will love you from afar, but we can't do this anymore. And so he left and he jumped on a plane. And I had to look at my two daughters, knowing that I was also ruining their life and feeling so guilty. I went into my bedroom and I closed the door and cried the whole night. The deepest of sorrowful, of despair, of dark, depressive thoughts that were literally running on autopilot. I had thoughts of maybe my daughters would be better off without me. And somehow, I say, through an act of divine grace, I heard those words, rage before period. And I Googled them. And that's what led me to reading for the first time premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder, known as PMDD, as I mentioned before, it affects 1 in 12 women in the United States, and 5% are suicidal. This is a condition and a disorder that in 2013 was put into the DSM-5. It's such an overlooked disorder and condition, also because we are not educated on our menstrual cycles. So here I was at 42 learning that I had a luteal phase. Here I was at 42 learning that I had 4 phases of my menstrual cycle. I remember the first time that I read luteal phase and I went to my daughters and said to them, are you learning any menstrual cycle education in high school in your health classes?" They're like, "No." And I'm like, "This is crazy." So that means nothing has happened. There's been no advancement. There hasn't been any conversations of change, of education, of research that are really trying to implement bringing awareness to menstrual cycles. So here we are as women trying to figure out what we had. To be honest, I didn't even know that I was looking up symptoms. I knew that I was sad. I knew that I was irritable. I knew that I was anxious. I knew that I was angry, but I wasn't that way. Like I said, just like when I was 18, I wasn't that person all the time. So what was it? It's interesting because PMDD often gets misdiagnosed as bipolar because the polarity of one day you feel completely like yourself, and another day, for weeks on end, you feel like the worst version of yourself. Like you unzipped yourself and a monster comes out and literally destroys everything in its path. It stops women from career advancement, from holding a job, from being able to be a nurturing mother, being present in family and life and social circles. It removes them from friend circles. And it all happens during our luteal phase. And if you don't know when your luteal phase is or what your luteal phase is, I'm happy to share with you a little bit more. So we have 4 phases of our menstrual cycles. And of course, we all know about ovulation. That's the one that we are taught were taught about in high school because that's the time we can get pregnant. And so our health classes turn into a sex ed focus, but they neglect to share a lot more. So after ovulation comes the luteal phase. And the luteal phase is the longest phase, and it can last up to 2 weeks before you get your period. And during that time, it's when most PMS symptoms are felt. And so PMDD is an extreme form of PMS. I think part of the problem is that we've been so dismissed when we talk about just having PMS symptoms. So we're not really talking about them because no one's being led to opening up the conversation to us. I often share that here we are all filling out the same form. And that form, when you go into your doctor's office, when you go into your OBGYN, to your therapist, we're all filling out the same form. And that form simply just asks a question about your period. And it's, when did you get your period? And you fill it out, and then you check the box, and you go back into the appointment, and you are sitting with maybe a PA or your doctor who comes in, and they ask you again, do you have a normal period? When's the last date that you have your period? And then that's it. No one's asking, how are your PMS symptoms? What are you how are you feeling before your period? So we are alone in this as women. And I pray that there is a day happening now that we begin to see change. And I hope by conversations like this, that it'll make you consider your experience when you go into your doctor's office, that you will feel a little bit more compelled and empowered to share your experiences. So you see, I think that it's more than 1 in 12, but because we're only on really this side of history trying to figure it all out, and we're bringing it more to the conversation. I recently have been told that there is a best-selling book out there where the main character has PMDD. You may have heard about PMDD through some TV shows or characters who have it. some influencers, some actresses. And so it's important that we take all of this really seriously because it affects all of our lives. You see, every woman in the room is affected by PMS, and we've become so dismissed in our man's world of just deal with it. You can do it just like every other woman does, but we don't realize how bad it truly is. So what happened with me? The moment that I realized that my symptoms finally had a name, I was validated for the first time. I will never forget also running down the hallway to my daughters and saying to them, I have a name. It has a name. What I have been feeling and experience has a name. I'm not a monster. And I'm so sorry I didn't know this before. But I have something called PMDD. And I'm going to figure out a way to no longer have it. Days later, I went down, 4 days later, I went down rabbit holes of Google searches, of every search engine that would trail off. And I discovered quite a lot of resources on YouTube about women who sounded just like me, women who were experiencing the heaviness and not able to really find relief. So I joined every Facebook PMDD group that I could. And the moment in those days, I felt so validated. I felt so seen. I felt understood. And while I really felt that deep sense of relief of knowing that I had PMDD and calling my doctors and telling them, and many of them had never heard of it, or it just wasn't what they were thinking it was because no one's asking me about my menstrual cycle and about my period and when I have it. No one's linking it. So when I was in these groups and I'm reading post after post and group after group, everyone was trying the same things. Maybe some of the relief that some of them were experiencing was working for them, but it wasn't working for me. So it really terrified me because the only option that was medically an answer was to get a radical hysterectomy. And for me, it just really wasn't an option. So I continued to just become so relentless in all of my searches. And I just knew that there had to be a cure. I was looking up the words cure. I was looking up the words healing. You see, I didn't know that I could even get to a root cause of my symptoms. That vocabulary wasn't even something that I would have acknowledged then. I had two beliefs. I grew up in a Christian home, and it was if God wasn't going to heal me and take this away, and if medicine wasn't going to give me this relief, I was born this way, that something was really, really wrong with me. And unfortunately, that's where most of PMDD sufferers really do what they still do believe. So in those days of trying to seek out more answers, I read one post and it was drilled down in the comments and it said that they no longer had PMDD and that they were freed from their symptoms. So I began to click into what this person was referencing, and it was a hybrid model of certain modalities of therapy, certain modalities that I never tried. And it's a blend of hypnotherapy, neuroscience, cognitive behavioral therapy, and neuroplasticity. Well, I didn't know what most of those were. So I had to really understand what all of this was and if it was, really like too woo woo for me, or if it was something that was like science based and if it really, really made sense. Well, the more that I explored all of these modalities on its own, I began to realize, wait, this does go back a really long time. This does go back before high school, the way I was feeling. So began to really peel back the layers of tracking my menstrual cycle, um, trying to really understand what was coming up. Yes, I know that it was the depression and anxiety and the rage and the sensitivity to rejection, but what was the real emotion? What was I saying to myself during this time? And it was very, very difficult during this time to begin to really um, look at within without all of this judgment. But I was hearing the worst things you could possibly say to yourself. And I knew that I had been telling myself these things for a very, very long time. So I opted into this therapy. And because it was during COVID, it was over Zoom. And this 2 hour session ended up feeling like 20 years of therapy, literally, like just peeled off layers and layers and layers of conditioning. And that's what I want to begin this conversation on, is that we need to see more of holistic or neuroscience work in medicine that we are treating as we are the body, and the mind is part of the body. And somehow it's become separate. Somehow the messaging of research has become very separated. And I want to bring neuroscience to the table on treating women's mental health disorders. The interesting thing is that PMDD is not a hormonal imbalance disorder. So during the luteal phase, it is when the hormones are shifting the most. And that's why we're feeling all of these feelings. But why? Why are we feeling it so deeply? Well, interesting enough is that PMDD is a hormonal sensitivity disorder. If you would take a blood or a hormone test or blood test for PMDD, well, one, the blood test, they're not, it doesn't exist. But if you would get your hormones checked, like myself and many other women did, all across, and this is why it takes 5 to 8 years for a diagnosis. So here we are, not educated on our menstrual cycles. It's not being linked to a hormonal imbalance. So, of course, it takes so long because it's not anything that our doctors are prepared to talk to us about. And so, what begins to happen is that once a doctor or GP can't figure it out, we'll send you to your gynecologist. She may send you to your endocrinologist. They may send you to your psychiatrist and your therapist. And so you end up having all of these different charts of no one really on the same page with what you're experiencing. And altogether missing that it's attached to your menstrual cycle in your luteal phase. So what is this sensitivity that's coming up? Well, the way that I see now the luteal phase is that it acts like a teacher. It's showing you, it's bringing up to the surface suppressed emotions, often tied to unmet needs and unresolved pain. And so month after month, it surges up to the top and it overflows and it's affecting everything in your life. I really see that the conversation goes to the, the our length of time of dealing with these suppressed emotions. PMDD only gets worse. I see that PMDD gets worse through different life changes. So whether that is moving or changing schools or changing jobs, or experiencing loss or divorce, all of these life changes and life events can trigger or reactivate these symptoms to a whole new level. And so by the time women hit perimenopause, even though there's a lot of lightheartedness or sarcasm around what we're all experiencing in perimenopause, I'm seeing it in a different way. I'm seeing it is that our symptoms are signals and they're guiding us and asking us to pay closer attention, that we can listen to the messages of what's coming up. And once we stop and pause and listen, we hear a limited belief. So a limited belief is the really powerful moment of when you can really go back into these therapy sessions and hear where they're really coming from. Research shows that our subconscious mind started being formed when in the third trimester up to 7 years old. And the subconscious mind is so fascinating. It is a sponge during these precious 7 years of all of our lives. And during this time, it just soaks in our entire environments and our worlds and our feelings and our beliefs and our memories, and everything that we experience is downloaded like a computer. We're just one little computer that's taking in all of this download, and that becomes our programming. Well, that programming actually begins to shape our lives, and 95% of everything you do today is basically on autopilot. Think about that. 95% of everything that you do today is basically from the first 7 years of your life. So PMDD, that sensitivity, I see it's stealing our identity as women. It steals our authenticity. It steals our voice. It makes us shrink back, and we become unable to reclaim our truth, our creativity, our gifts that are inside of each one of us. And it tricks us into believing that that is really who we are. And so the sensitivity that I see is, take like an INFJ personality. These women are so sensitive, healers, intuitives, doctors, nurses, caretakers, I'm sure many of you. And so that sensitivity is a stolen gift that our PMS symptoms have stolen, and they're showing up like depression and anxiety and rage and sensitivity to rejection and chronic fatigue, eating issues, the inability to move on in your life, the removal of yourself in social settings. And it convinces you that this is who you are and this is the kind of life that you're always going to have. Well, through the work of the subconscious mind, you're able to understand by way of hypnotherapy where these beliefs and these feelings come from. So I've had clients who have said, well, I don't really remember my childhood, so I'm not really sure if this is going to work for me, but we can all go back to feelings and see any time that we experienced a negative feeling, that negative feeling became a negative belief. And that negative belief became a negative loop, really, that our thoughts began to run on. And the moment that that feeling becomes a belief and it's become an activated thought, it is the truth of you. And because our mind is wired to survive and to keep us safe, we believe that that outcome of that belief is true. You're like, well, you sort of lost me a little bit. Like, how is this really making sense to PMDD or to mental health? Well, the way that I see it is there is a why behind our conditioning. There is a why behind our pain that's coming up. So it's not just a conversation only about PMDD, but I see this neuroscience as one of the most powerful awakenings that we have in medicine today and in research, and to bring to the conversation on a science-based, backed research level of the power of the mind. So, to share a personal story, I went to the Jersey Shore when I was 6 years old, and I was the youngest in my group of family. And I was with my older cousins and my older sister. And my mom was pregnant with my brother, and my father and my uncle and my aunt were together. We all decided to go on a walk, and all the adults said, Rachel is the youngest. Make sure you all stick together as a group. And we went on a long walk. Well, my cousins ended up watching this football game that was being played in the ocean by another family, and they were all into it. Well, 6-year-old Rachel wasn't into it, but right behind me was a family and a little girl who looked around my age, building a sandcastle. I didn't begin to play with them, but I just watched them build their sandcastle. And they had out all the buckets, and they had out, the water, and they had little shovels, and it was like a whole team. And I was just fascinated by it. Well, I turned around, and my sister and my older cousins were gone. Well, back in those days, I had a terrifying fear that I was going to get kidnapped. I grew up when the milk cartons had kidnapping little images, and you would just read the description while you're eating your cereal, and you're just terrified that that could happen to you. So I didn't talk to anybody except that I literally just started running. And I thought that if I talked to somebody, because I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers, that I would just run and I would find my family. Well, for hours, I ran all the way down the beach, and this was packed at the Jersey Shore. I ran all the way back, back and forth and back and forth, crying and absolutely beside myself. And I always knew that this happened to me. This wasn't like this was a suppressed memory. I always knew that this was my experience when I was 6 years old at the beach. But I never knew how much it actually defined me. So here I am in one of these sessions, and all of a sudden I see little Rachel, 6 years old Rachel. I'm treating my PMDD, and I wanted to treat sadness. I wanted to treat this because I know that I always had a deep sadness from a young age. And I knew that I was also a very sensitive child. I knew that I could easily cry and still can today. But now I see my tears and my sensitivity more as a superpower. And I'm no longer ashamed that I can or that I am emotional. But when I was in the session and under hypnosis, I went back to this scene, and all of a sudden, you hear the subconscious mind of little Rachel all the way back then. And what I heard was that they must not be looking for me, because if they were looking for me, I would be found. And so if no one's looking for me, I'm all alone. And if I'm really all alone, then I'm not loved. And if I'm not loved, I'm not lovable. And if really I'm not lovable, then I shouldn't be here. Wow, right? 6 years old, little Rachel believed that all the way back then, and that activated feeling and that activated belief became a thought and became a life theme in my life. So much rejection, so many issues with body image and eating disorders and guilt and shame and depression and anger and rage. And that was just one memory. You know, there's conversations now around trauma. You know, we all know the big trauma, but there's new defining a little bit more clarity as to what trauma really is or what it can be. And trauma can be any negative experience that left a negative feeling in you. And it's for certain that 100% all of us have experienced little traumas. So these little traumas have become a defining point in all of our lives. And so because I was so highly sensitive, and because I had these suppressed emotions and these suppressed pains, there was several scenes and several beliefs that I have worked through over the years. But the moment that you can identify that limited belief, you see that you're no longer that little girl anymore, that little one anymore, that little child. You see, the way that I see our luteal phase is that everything that's coming up to the surface is like the suppressed little Rachel still coming up. Every unmet need and every unresolved pain that comes up in your life is an invitation for you to explore something that's most likely suppressed or unseen or unheard, even by you, because we're not taught to really honor our emotions. We're not taught to really explore them. If we feel a certain way, we're often shamed into silence. If we're too loud, if we're too quiet, we're shamed. If we're too big, if we're too loud, we're told to be quiet. And so where do all these emotions go? Well, they become very suppressed, and then they show up like severe PMS, and they show up like PMDD, and I believe that they show up like perimenopause. So now that we have seen a belief and you can understand that you're no longer there, you're validating your experience. This beautiful piece in the therapy of recognizing, an inner child healing, where you can really begin to hear that inner child in you cry and seek the attention, or hear the belief that really came up. And you can nurture her, love her back to being present within you now that she's no longer there. She's no longer 6 years old. She's loved, and she's seen, and she's safe, and she's heard. So, what gets me really excited about these sessions and this breakthrough in science is, okay, so now we revealed the subconscious programming, the limited belief, the limited feelings, the trauma. We exposed it for what it was. We played detective. We're telling ourselves, okay, we're not there anymore. We're healing ourselves. We're validating. We're here. We're recognizing our own truth and our own power, which is such a beautiful thing to give to yourself. But what changes everything is when you take all of this and you reframe these beliefs and you turn it into a powerful practice of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to rewire itself, literally rewiring your neural pathways so that you're taking the limited beliefs that once held you back and held you stuck and held you alone and made you believe that you were not loved, that you were not safe, that you were not seen, that you were not heard. You're able to build and reframe this with neuroplasticity. One of the ways that the brain rewires itself is through repetition. And so by practicing these new powerful beliefs and implementing strategies or recording or daily practices, affirmations, sitting in, making yourself really feel safe, regulating your nervous system, these are powerful practices that you can use to harness now and reclaim your authority, your personal power, to reclaim the truth about you. And that is that you're loved, that you're enough, that you have always been enough. See, we all came into this existence and this human experience fully in our own being, but through our human conditioning and through the limitations of society and our family and the products of environment that we were in, they shaped us. They shaped our reality. They shaped our thoughts. They shaped our beliefs. But when you can bring that into your awareness, and when you can look and explore in a new way, that you can shift these limited beliefs and that you can reclaim and nurture and reframe them, and harnessing the power of neuroplasticity slowly over it's 21 to 31 days that the brain takes to really form a habit. So what we try to implement is these strategies of best practices of getting your mind in this repetitious new belief system. And so now when your luteal phase comes, it doesn't hold its power anymore because the trigger is gone. Or if you begin to feel a little triggered, you can go, wait, 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 I'm not there anymore. I'm not her anymore. I'm here. And now I know why I used to feel that way. I know why I used to believe that way. I know why. I know why. I know me. And it's the most incredible journey that you could really, really go on to reframe your limited beliefs and to heal at the root level your symptoms. There is a modality that is treating the root cause of symptoms, and it has nothing to do with symptom management and big pharma. And my hope is that we bring to the conversation menstrual cycle awareness, menstrual cycle education, tracking our symptoms, talking to our doctors about it, bringing it now to the tables of research because it's needed. But by bringing this to awareness, we will save lives. We will save lives of PMDD sufferers who are so alone. And so whether it is that some of these other traditional methods are bringing them relief, that is amazing. We want all the options. We want all the modalities that are science-based and that are proven, research-backed practices to come to the surface so that traditional therapy and holistic modalities can now finally have a voice together for women all across this country and all across the world, that we get to be on the forefront of change. And I encourage you today to begin looking and exploring your emotions before your period and track your luteal phase symptoms. Have these conversations with other women in your life because you definitely most likely have someone who's suffering and they just don't know that it's PMDD, or if they know, they're scared to talk about it. But I want to share that there's hope and healing. I am now 5 years outside of having PMDD symptoms rule and take over my life. And thank you for allowing me to share my story. And thank you that as we begin to bring menstrual cycle awareness to the table and PMDD, it's such a powerful opportunity for us all to make change in women's health.